There we go. I just had to recreate the entire last episode until here because the game crashed while I was trying to save it. After they walked a while, the fog seemed to clear. They had arrived at the village of Kira. Konoe thought how he'd been lost just a little while ago. Now it was simply because he was with this Kiran. Even though the fog cleared, the heaviness of the air didn't change. Like the Yukoku Valley, the village of Kira was covered in darkness. All of the cats' houses were built on top of trees. Their exteriors were rustic. There were absolutely no decorations. It was a much drearier place than Kaoru. If Kaoru was green, then he'd say Kira's color was grey. It had a barbarous air to it. Barbarous air to it? A lot of the village cats who watched them just narrowed their eyes and showed caution. Threatening growls rumbled in their chests. It was hard to tell clearly, but there seemed to be numerous cats with black ears, tail, and markings. The cat who'd led him here now walked straight through the village. In the middle of the village was a big dead tree. Built on top of it was a hut noticeably larger than the other houses. Leading to it were wooden stairs. Look how pretty he is. Look how absolutely gorgeous this sweetheart is. He's such a darling. The black cat headed up the stairs and entered the hut, and then came back out a while later. From atop the tree, he signaled to Konoe with his eyes. Konoe went up the stairs to enter the hut. The interior of the hut was a lot more spacious than he thought. But there was nothing valuable in the dim hut, only a few storage pots on some time-worn shelves. An old cat stood in the corner of the hut, and a younger cat waited behind him. Konoe was surprised when he saw the young cat. The cat was female. She is gorgeous. Oh my god, I forgot about her. Her white ears and tail stood out well against her brown skin. The female cat glared at Konoe with big eyes, as if to expel his gaze. The old cat sat down. His body was large. A deep crease ran down the middle of his forehead. Even though he was old, the sharp glint in his eyes quietly seized Konoe. His ears and tail weren't black, but marks firmly stood out on his skin. The old cat said to the black cat Konoe had followed here. His tone felt more severe than necessary. The cat did as he was told and silently left the hut. The elderly cat looked back to Konoe. His tail swung greatly and noisily beat against the floor like a powerful whip. Oh. I clicked too fast, I apologize. The Kiran elder, Brensley looked Konoe up and down. The elder's gaze stopped at Konoe's arms. Because the gauntlet was torn, his black markings were exposed. Exactly.
何か知ってるんじゃないかと思ってこの村を探してた。
Oh. The chief snorted and approached Konoe, taking hold of his arm, his palms dry and rough.
黒い耳と鬼黒いあざ、言い伝えにある呪いの象徴。キラの民の中には確かにそれと合致する者もいる。だから世間では何かと言われておろうが、我らは我らの伝統を重んじているだけだ。例えば
Kira's elder stuck out his own arm and rubbed the mark on his skin. The mark faded and warped a bit.
これはあざではない。キラの民の証とでも言うべきか。水と蜜を練り合わせた墨で描いたものに過ぎぬ。黒い耳と尾を持つ猫が多いのもキラの祖先に由来する。純粋な血筋を守り抜いているがゆえだ。だが主のこれは。
The chief looked into Konoe's eyes, and Konoe suddenly felt powerless.
残念ながら我らとは何の関係もない。
Yeah. The expectant hope Konoe had been feeling was crushed when he heard that.
主はどこから来たのだ。
カロ
おお、カローか。村を出てきたのか。
Did I say Kaoru? Didn't I say Kaoru earlier? Have I been saying it wrong the entire time and not noticing? Oh, god damn it.
ああ、もう戻れない。
Not with a body like this.
だろうな。
The elder sighed and cast his gaze towards the window. He seemed to be pondering something. The attending female cat behind the elder stared intensely at Konoe. She seemed strong-willed.
無駄足を踏ませたな。
While he stared out the window, the elder suddenly opened his mouth.
いや、話を聞けただけでもよかった。
He wouldn't be surprised if they chased him out or killed him, though he knew their states were different. The Kiran elders seemed distracted by something else. Konoe began to wonder if the rumors he heard in Kaoru... Yeah, I said Kaoru, right? Oh my god, nobody noticed. In Kaoru about them being savages were lies. The elder turned around and silently looked at Konoe, then shook his head.
よそ者となれ合うつもりはないが、主の気持ちもわからんではない。我らも時には周囲の風当たりの強さに牙を向きたくなる時がある。その体、さぞ生きにくかろうな。お、ましてや。
Damn it!
自分の意志ではないとなればなおさらだろう。
My finger was twitching.
そういったものは他者にはなかなかわからぬ痛みだ。
Konoe grit his teeth and clenched his fist, his claws cutting into his palm. Into palm. He didn't need to be here any longer. Konoe turned on his heels and started to walk towards the door.
行くあてはあるのか。
Nope. He froze when the elder's voice suddenly called out.
いや、
夜の月が昇るまでは村にいても構わんぞ。
How nice.
え、
Konoe involuntarily turned around. The attending female cat's face suddenly stiffened.
消耗しておるのだろう。体を休めていけばいい。
おさん、お待ちください。
黙っていろ、かがり。
The female cat, Kagari, controlled herself and reluctantly shut her mouth. The chieftain watched Kagari and continued.
ただし、どんな事情があろうとも、よそ者はよそ者だ。この通り、民も歓迎はしないだろう。 それでも良いのであればの話だ。
The chief's tone was stern, but he probably understood that Konoe had no other place to rest. Konoe stood there in silence. Strengthened by his confusion, his tail shook from left to right several times. He was honestly thankful for the offer. But, as the elder said, the cats of Kira wouldn't welcome him. Kagari, who was trying to hide her dissatisfaction, stared at the profile of the elder. Aside from that, he had one more concern. That was sacrifices. Kira's lack of food supply was probably no different from Karo or other villages. This meant that outsiders could be suitable prey. They could eat him without any qualms. Qualms?
何か聞きたいことでもあるのか？
The elder narrowed his eyes as he looked at Konoe.
キラでは煮えの制度はあるのか？
煮え？ああ。
The elder furrowed his brow in open disgust.
我らはキラの血筋に誇りを持っている。どれだけ飢えたとしても同族を食らうなどもってのほか。そもそも主の体を食らいたいなどという強者はそうはいないと思うが。
That much was so. It was said that in Karo that those who ate a cursed cat became cursed themselves. Kira's families took pride in their blood. At least they seemed more practical than Karo. Karo,
外を呼んでこい。
the elder ordered the attending female cat. The female cat seemed to try to hide her confusion. However, she immediately left the hut. After a few minutes, the hut's door opened. The black cat that led Konoe into the village came in. The elder beckoned to him. The black cat stepped forward, expressionless.
これは名をアサトという。夜が明けるまで主の面倒を見させよう。
The cat called Asato looked at Konoe. The eyes that watched him were dark blue, like the night sky at dusk. He was probably a year or two older than Konoe, but Konoe felt an immature air about him, as if he were a child still developing. He noticed the elder watching Asato closely. His eyes shone with an offensive light, as if he were watching something disgusting. Aversive, sorry. He hadn't looked at Konoe like that. He thought that maybe something had happened. As ordered by the elder, Asato led Konoe out of the hut. Konoe felt the other village cats watching him with hatred and curiosity as they passed, but it seemed like those gazes were cast not just at him, but also at Asato. She looked at the back and black tail walking in front of him. Asato didn't seem concerned and only walked in silence. There was conflict between the cats of any village. It was that way in Karo too, of course. Konoe wasn't one to be too worried about it, but for some reason it made him uneasy. Asato's home was on the outskirts of the village. It was the same as the others, a simple house made of wood and stone. When Konoe entered it, his impression didn't change. When Asato entered the house, he immediately picked up something like a twig from a shelf, an ignition branch, a branch with crushed ore powder on its tip. When Asato struck the ignition branch against the wall, its tip caught fire. He put the flame into a lamp hanging beside the door. This is so cool. An orange light spread through the room. Konoe, who hated fire, avoided the lamp and moved to the opposite wall. Since it was their first time meeting, he couldn't just ask him to put out the fire simply because he didn't like it. people pleaser be like? Asato sat against the wall. He gestured a hand in front of him when he saw Konoe still standing. He was probably gesturing for him to sit. Konoe took off his drawstring bag, which he carried on his back, and sat down where Asato indicated. He tried to casually look around. Further off, there was a bed, a storage pot, and a barrel for water. Besides that, there wasn't really anything at all. Asato looked away and sat cross-legged, sometimes twitching the tip of his tail. Neither of them spoke. Konoe glanced at him. He couldn't read any emotions from his expressionless face. Before they entered Kira, Asato had been filled with murderous intent. His intense gaze was branded into Konoe's mind. But the way he looked now made him seem like an entirely different cat altogether. The awkward silence continued for some time, but his companion didn't say anything. Actually, he seemed a little nervous. Konoe removed his shoes from his weary feet and stretched them out, his lips parted slightly in a sigh. He removed his remaining gauntlet and began to groom. After being immersed in his grooming for a while, he suddenly felt a stare. Asato was watching him closely.
まずかったか
He also stared back, then started to feel like he had done something wrong. Konoe had asked this question out of reflex. Asato looked puzzled.
何が毛づくろいいや
Asato averted his eyes as if he'd panicked just a little. His tail, thinner than Konoe's tail, beat against the floor restlessly. What? Asato watched Konoe out of the corner of his eyes, but immediately looked away again, then muttered in a soft voice.
腹は腹は減ってないか
The way he's moving out, he's so cute. These sudden questions surprised Konoe, but now that he mentioned it, he remembered his hunger. He felt like eating.
少し
When Konoe answered, Asato stood up and walked towards the pot. He pulled some food out from inside and returned.
これ
He held out several dried fruits. There were also creams mixed in.
いいのか
Asato nodded, then looked away. Konoe thought he was kind of weird. He got a completely different impression from him now than he did when they fought a little while ago. At first glance, Asato was expressionless, but he didn't seem like a cold person. He was kind of awkward? Perhaps he didn't like interacting with others. Konoe reached out a hand to grab a dry cream and tossed it in his mouth. The strong, sour sweetness spread through his mouth, and for some reason, he felt relief sink into the pit of his gut. Finally feeling he could relax, a soft sigh leaked from his lips.
うまいか
Konoe nodded honestly to Asato, who'd asked him hesitantly.
そうか
He's such a cute bean. Asato finally looked straight at Konoe, and his mouth relaxed, as if he were relieved. When he smiled, he looked like a child, Konoe thought. While Konoe ate, Asato stood up and returned to offer him water from a small cup.
これも飲むといい悪いいや
Again, there was silence, but it was intense. Like the swaying flame of the lamp, it was a soft silence. After he ate 3 more fruits or so and drank some water, Konoe quietly looked up at Asato.
あんたはいいのか飯とか俺はいい
The faint light illuminated his jawline. As the flame shook, the pupils of his dark blue eyes relaxed into white circles. Looking up at Konoe from time to time, Asato seemed more like a concerned animal than a cat. His eyes were unexpectedly gentle. The glaring eye from their first encounter now seemed imagined. That reminded him. Asato must have noticed that the symptoms Konoe was afflicted with were different from the state of the Kiran cats. Plus, the elder practically forced him to take care of Konoe. This must be unpleasant for him.
嫌じゃないのか。何が？
At the return question, Konoe kept quiet. Konoe hadn't meant to ask, but he carelessly spoke anyway. He didn't like talking about these things, asking his companions how they felt about him. As Asato thought, time seemed to stand still. Konoe couldn't stand it. He wanted to beat his head against the wall, but he held back. Getting neither affirmative nor a negative, he just didn't know how to handle these sort of situations. If his companion really hated it, he'd feel like a burden and would feel awkward asking someone to take care of him. He'd rather sleep outside. Asato watched Konoe, not understanding what he meant. Konoe gradually became embarrassed and turned his face away, putting the cup of water aside. He opened his mouth boldly. Whoops.
長の命令だろ。俺の面倒を見てるのは。本当は嫌だったら悪いと思って。
His voice trailed off.
あ
Asato answered vaguely. It neither confirmed nor denied what he'd said. Left feeling uneasy, Konoe's tail involuntarily stood stiffly. Asato suddenly met his eyes, peering closely at Konoe. Konoe lowered his gaze because he was being stared at.
綺麗な目だ。
Ah!
は？
He answered reflexively. What did he say all of a sudden? This came out of nowhere, and he didn't understand what Asato meant.
別にどこにでもいるような人だけど。いや。
Asato shook his head lightly, then looked at Konoe from the corner of his eye.
色じゃない。戦っている時の目が力強くて。
When they fought, he was talking about when they first met. He was just desperately trying to not succumb to Asato's bloodthirst.
それに毛並みも鍵尻尾なんだな。
Pointing it out made Konoe feel his anger boil. He is just so awkward, he has no idea how to communicate. He felt like Asato was just pointing it out just to embarrass him. A crooked tail was by no means attractive.
悪かったな、鍵尻尾で。
At that blunt answer, Asato's ears stood up straight.
違う。綺麗だと思って。
Konoe didn't really know what Asato meant. Considering it, he looked at his own tail. Konoe tried to wiggle its tip. It was just an ordinary tail, nothing special about it. Instead, it looked scruffy from his tumble earlier. Compared to his, Konoe looked down at Asato's tail. Even though they were the same jet black, he thought Asato's was much more beautiful. I just put them much in there accidentally. Since the fur was shorter than Konoe's, it had a shiny surface and was glossy.
お前の方が綺麗だろ。え？
Asato looked at Konoe with wide eyes. Konoe had only said what he honestly felt, but when he saw Asato making a face like that, he felt like he'd done something wrong. Konoe hung his head with a sour look. He felt like everything he did and said was strange.
初めてだ。
A low mutter broke the awkward silence.
そんなことを言われたのは
Konoe reflexively lifted his face. Asato's face became awkwardly stiff. Just like a scolded child who had done something bad. But he didn't look like it was that much of a bad thing, though. Maybe he was just embarrassed. Awkward words. Awkward behavior. Even though he had those frightening eyes when he'd swung his knife.
変なやつだな。
Konoe muttered without thinking. Asato blinked a few times as if he were caught off guard.
変なのか俺はでもお前も変だ絶対変だ
Konoe was a little offended by what he said.
お前は俺よりずっと変だろ。
そうなのか
そうだよ。
It's not a
そうか
it's not a competition who's weirder.
嘘だよ。
He answered back. Asato's response were far too honest. It was a little bit funny. He seemed just like a kid, even though his body was big. When Konoe laughed softly, the air around Asato softened slightly.
お前名前はなんて言うんだ
この絵。
この絵
As if he had given him a delicious candy, Asato mouthed Konoe's name to himself several times. Konoe felt strangely tickled.
この絵
Asato suddenly held out his hand.
直してやる
何を。
腕のそれ切ってしまったから俺が
Ah! Konoe realized he was talking about his gauntlet. After removing it from his back, he handed it to Asato.
できるのか。
できる
Asato held the cloth in his mouth and got up, retrieved something from a shelf and returned. He wound a thread tightly around a thin sharpened stone and began to sew the torn part of the gauntlet. Konoe watched in amazement at the unexpectedly delicate way his bony brown fingers moved.
すごいな。
He muttered in admiration, and Asato lowered his eyes as if he were a little embarrassed. After that, he made an apologetic face.
あの時は悪かった
え
侵入者は排除するように言われているだから
Instantly remembering, Konoe shook his head at the thought.
ああ、わかってる。気にしてない。
そうか
Yokatta. Asato's voice was tinged with relief. The tear in the gauntlet was mended quickly, and it was returned to its former state. He gave it back to Konoe.
助かった。
いや
As he put on his gauntlet, he sensed a gaze on him. Asato was staring at the mark on his arm.
聞かないのか。
何を
この体のことは。
Asato averted his eyes and looked puzzled, but nodded slightly.
話したくなければ聞かない話したくなったら教えてくれ
Asato's awkward concern made Konoe feel that his impression of him was steadily changing. In some ways, they were similar, he thought. Probably because of his relief, he couldn't hold back a yawn. Remembering his fatigue, he tried to curl up.
少し眠るといい寝床を使え
あんたは。
俺はどこでもいい
Asato slowly got up, then showed Konoe the bed. Konoe hesitated for a moment but couldn't bring himself to decline such a gesture of precious goodwill, and he followed obediently. Asato sat down on the ground and rolled onto his back. Imagine just being able to sleep anywhere. Konoe took off his coat and carelessly put it somewhere before crawling under the blanket. It felt nice, but it smelled different from his own bed. Not much time had passed since he left Karo. Still, it felt like it had been ages since he'd slept in a warm bed. He realized he was happy with just that much. While purring faintly, Konoe started to nod off into a shallow sleep.
俺は
Half asleep, he heard a muffled voice from beyond his blanket.
お前のことは嫌じゃない。
Because of his sleepiness, he couldn't hear it clearly, but he wagged his tail in response. He then fell into more peaceful sleep than any he had in a while. They're so cute. Bet you can imagine who I'm gonna try to raise. At that time, they were unaware of what was happening in Kira. They heard voices. The voices descended on all the cats of Kira, whispering softly in their ears. You saw him. Those were the signs of the curse. Can we just let him run loose? Shouldn't we run him out of the village? He is no good. He's probably up to something. That guy. What if he's a Meiki cat? If we let him go, it'll be the end of us. It began to trigger their destructive emotions. They wouldn't forgive this stranger. It was crucial if they wanted to protect the pride of the Kira village. They had to expel him now, obliterate into darkness anything that threatened Kira. Anyone who threatened Kira, no matter who, no matter how many. Get rid of them. The whispers stirred the hearts of the cats in Kira. Red flames rose inside their chests. The voices rose from there as well. Their pupils narrowed and deep growls escaped from their throats. A shadowy figure stood in the center of the fog-shrouded village of Kira. The shadow was clad in flames. The black heat waves bordering in red swayed and rose into the air. The shadow's crimson hair billowed as he smiled in amusement. His slightly parted lips spun the words.
コノエ。起きろ、コノエ。
Hearing someone call his name roused Konoe from his sleep. Through his blurred vision, he saw Asato's face. He slowly raised his body using his elbows. Coming out of an extremely deep sleep, his mind was in a haze.
逃げるぞ。
逃げる
He was surprised to hear something like that so suddenly, but Asato's face was completely serious.
いいから早くしろ。
Suddenly, his ears picked up on the sound of something rustling outside Asato's home. Konoe tried to listen carefully. There appeared to be several cats surrounding them.
何が起きてる
説明している暇もない。
Konoe crawled out from under the blanket and stood up to dress, then slung his bag over his shoulder. Asato seemed to be ready to go. Konoe grasped the doorknob. Their breaths caught, and he threw the door open. The base of his tail shivered and stood on end. It was dark outside, and several cats stood there, shrouded in darkness. They had Asato's home surrounded. Konoe felt their terrible bloodthirst.
殺せ殺せあいつを殺せよそ者を殺せ
Their curses were directed at Konoe. He regarded the cats before him in disbelief. They certainly had not welcomed him, but he didn't think they would turn on him like this. Perhaps they had learned about his detestable body during the night. After all, he didn't look normal.
殺せ。あいつは患者だ。名義の猫だ。
The elder stepped out into the lead and pointed at Konoe as he yelled in a loud voice. When Konoe saw the elder, he was shocked into speechlessness. Why did the chieftain think like that? Had it been a trap? It couldn't be true. He never thought that there were false words exchanged between them. Confused, Konoe looked up at Asato. Asato stared intently at the Kiran cats with a solemn face.
何が起こってるんだ。
わからない。
Asato slowly shook his head. In the meantime, the cats of Kira raised their voices and growled, seemingly ready to pounce at any moment.
あさとよ、そいつを殺せ。貴様もキラの猫の端くれなら。そうだ。少しは役に立ったらどうだ。
Asato? Konoe couldn't believe that what he was hearing. At the same time, the Kiran cats turned their bloodthirst from Konoe to Asato. Asato's face stiffened and he merely looked straight ahead. All the while, a black flame smoldered in the eyes of the Kiran cats. It was coming. Konoe could feel it instinctively. He couldn't control it. His heart began to beat profusely. His bad premonition became worse. For an instant, a serpent flashed through his mind. A red snake. He felt something wiggle in the depths of his stomach.
このままじゃ追い詰められる。走るぞ。
Konoe nodded at Asato's words. He wanted to get away right now.
コノエは右へ逃げろ。
お前は。
話している暇はない。いいから早く。
Not sure about this one, to be honest. Oh no, the game froze again. Oh my god. I have half an hour to recreate now. Okay. Alright, guess I'm gonna see you in the next part then. I'm sorry.